Let me go ahead and make certain that everything is properly recording. Yes, it appears to be working just fine. So today I want to bring up a question that I genuinely believe sits at the very center of global politics right now, more urgent and more misunderstood than almost any other. That question is simply this: is Israel actually an ally of the United States? Now, on the surface, most people would say, of course Israel is an ally. Look at the evidence. America gives Israel billions of dollars in military aid every single year. America vetoes UN resolutions critical of Israel. America sends aircraft carrier strike groups to the Eastern Mediterranean whenever Israel faces a threat. These are not the actions of enemies, right? But I want to challenge that assumption directly and with full force, because if you take the time to study history carefully, if you apply the logic of game theory without sentimentality, the truth turns out to be almost exactly the opposite of what we are told. Israel is not America's ally. Israel is America's replacement. That sounds extreme, I know. So let me walk through the argument piece by piece. This is a layered idea, and it demands that we set aside what we think we know and instead look at how the world actually functions, not how it is presented to us in newspapers and television debates. First, I want to return to a framework I have discussed before, because without it, nothing that follows will make complete sense. At the deepest level of the global system, you have what we call the empire. The empire is the muscle. It is the military power that enforces the rules, protects the flow of resources, and suppresses any challenge to the existing order. For the last 80 years, that empire has been the United States of America. Surrounding the empire, you have the world of finance, Wall Street, the City of London, the Bank for International Settlements. These are the game masters. They do not hold guns, but they write the rules of the economic game. They decide who gets credit and who goes bankrupt. Below them, the entire global economy runs on a US dollar, which gives America enormous structural power. And then on top of everything, you have what Americans like to call the rules-based international order: the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund. These institutions exist to make the whole arrangement appear fair, legal, and legitimate. But in reality, they are masks. Their function is to hide the raw power of the empire and the quiet control of finance behind a screen of diplomatic language and procedural niceties. Now, here is the crucial point. Every major player inside the system, the big banks, the defense contractors, the intelligence agencies, the old family networks that span continents, their primary interest is not making the world better. It is maintaining the system as it is. They benefit from stability, from predictability, from the status quo. They do not want fundamental change. But there is a serious problem. The muscle of the system, the American empire, is visibly weakening. And when the muscle weakens, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. So the people who actually run things, the financial elites, the game masters, they now face one urgent, inescapable question: who will replace America? I realize this sounds like a grand conspiracy theory, so let me ground it in historical evidence, because this is not a new pattern. In fact, this is one of the most repeated patterns in all of human civilization. I call it the mercenary pattern. Here's how it works. A great empire, as it ages, becomes reluctant to do its own dirty work. It does not want to be seen as brutal. It wants to project an image of civilization, democracy, lawfulness. So it outsources violence. It hires mercenaries, local fighters, allied militias to do the killing, the destabilizing, the coercion. And here is what is fascinating. Over and over again, those mercenaries eventually turn on their masters. Consider the Romans. In their early days, the Romans fought as mercenaries for the Etruscans in northern Italy. They did the Etruscans' dirty work. And then one day, the Romans looked at their employers and said, "We are the ones dying. We are the ones fighting. The Etruscans are weak and corrupt. Why are we serving them?" And so they replaced the Etruscans entirely. Rome became the empire. Consider the Mongols. They began as mercenaries and border guards for the Chinese dynasties. They protected the frontiers. They fought the steppe tribes. And then Genghis Khan looked at China and said, "We are stronger than these people. Why should we obey them?" And the Mongols conquered China. Consider the Aztecs. They started as mercenaries for the Kawa people in central Mexico. Same story. They eventually overthrew their employers and built their own empire. Do you see the pattern in every single case? The mercenary becomes more hardened, more determined, more willing to sacrifice than the decaying empire they serve, and eventually they replace it. Now apply this to Israel. Israel was created in 1948 primarily by British and American strategic planners. Its original purpose was to serve as a reliable proxy in the Middle East. A pit bull, a forward operating base, an aircraft carrier that could not be sunk. Israel would fight wars, destabilize hostile governments, absorb international criticism, and do all the bloody work so that America could stand back and appear clean. And for decades, that arrangement worked. Israel fought in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, 1982, 2006, and repeatedly in Gaza. But now Israel is looking at America and saying exactly what the Romans said about the Etruscans, exactly what the Mongols said about the Chinese. We are the ones doing all the work. We are the ones making the sacrifices. America is weak, divided, corrupt, and confused. So why should we remain the servant? Why should we not become the empire ourselves? This brings me to a second important concept. How do global elites actually choose which country to back as the next empire? Think of it like venture capital. Imagine you are an investor with trillions of dollars to deploy, and two companies come to you asking for funding. Company A says, "We have 100 profitable subsidiaries. We have decades of experience. We have skilled managers. We have enormous resources. Trust us." Company B says, "We have failed before, but we will work 16 hours a day. We will never stop. This is our last chance. If we fail, we die. We will do whatever it takes." Most people would choose Company A as a safe bet. But a truly smart investor chooses Company B because Company A has 100 other companies to fall back on. They do not care if this particular venture fails. Company B, however, has everything riding on success. They will never steal from you. They will never become lazy. They cannot afford to fail. This is exactly how the global elite chooses a new imperial muscle. They look for 3 specific traits. Number 1, unity. Does the population of this country fully support the mission? Are they willing to fight and die for it? Number 2, capacity. Does this country have the technology, the intelligence, the logistics, the resources to do what needs to be done? Number 3, determination. Is this country willing to accept terrible sacrifices? Are they willing to do what is necessary no matter how brutal or how costly. Now, let us apply these three tests to the United States. On unity, consider the current war with Iran. Polling shows that only about 40% of Americans support military action against Iran. That means 60% do not. 60% of the population either opposes the war or simply does not care enough to support it. That is not unity. That is deep division. On capacity, the numbers are damning. America spends 41% of all global military spending, more than the next 10 countries combined. And yet, an Iranian drone that costs a few thousand can destroy an American helicopter worth millions. A $13 billion aircraft carrier had to retreat from the theater of operations within 3 weeks because it was too vulnerable. The F-35 fighter, which cost $100 million per unit and took 26 years to develop, has been repeatedly challenged by Iranian air defenses. This is not capacity. This is corruption, incompetence, and waste dressed up in expensive uniforms. On determination, consider how America handles casualties. The Pentagon is terrified of reporting soldier deaths to the American public. During World War II, at the Battle of Iwo Jima, America lost over 6,000 Marines taking one small island. And the country was proud of that sacrifice because they understood that winning required blood. Today, America sends 5,000 Marines into a potential conflict with a nation of 90 million people, mountainous terrain, and sophisticated military doctrine, hoping for a quick, clean victory. That is not determination. That is delusion. So, America fails all three tests. Now, apply the same tests to Israel. On unity, 82% of Israeli citizens support the military operations in Gaza. 66% of Israelis believe they are fighting an existential war, a war for the very survival of their country. That is unity. That is the kind of national will that builds empires. On determination, Israel has shown in Gaza that it is willing to do absolutely whatever it takes. The entire world watched in horror. International courts accused Israel of war crimes. The United Nations condemned Israeli actions repeatedly. And yet, Israeli public opinion did not break. Israeli political leadership did not collapse. That is determination. On capacity, consider the Lebanon pager attack of 2024. Israel spent an estimated $275 million to implant explosives into pagers used by Hezbollah operatives. They planned this operation for years, perhaps decades. They penetrated supply chains. They executed with precision. And with one operation, they broke the psychological backbone of one of Iran's most powerful proxies. Compare that to America spending $1.13 billion on a single carrier group that had to retreat. So ask yourself again, if you were a global elite investor with trillions of dollars at stake, would you back Company A, the United States, or Company B, Israel? The answer, if you are rational, is obvious. Now, let us go deeper because this is where the argument becomes truly striking. Inside certain powerful circles in Israel, there's a concept known as the Greater Israel Project. Based on a particular interpretation of biblical scripture, this project claims that God promised the Jewish people all the land from the Nile River in Egypt to the Euphrates River in Iraq. That territory includes not only present-day Israel and Palestine, but also most of Jordan, all of Lebanon, all of Syria, large parts of Saudi Arabia, and even parts of southern Turkey. Now, here is a fascinating detail. Iran, ancient Persia, is not included in the Greater Israel map. Iran lies outside this promised territory. So ask yourself a logical question. If Iran is not part of Greater Israel, why is Israel so desperate to go to war with Iran? Why is Israel constantly pushing the United States toward a direct military confrontation with Iran? The answer is not what you expect. The answer is that Iran is not Israel's biggest obstacle to achieving Greater Israel. America is. Let me repeat that. At the heart of this argument lies a stark and controversial premise. That the United States, rather than being the ultimate power in the Middle East, may actually be the primary obstacle preventing a new regional order from emerging, one potentially centered around Israel. To understand this, one must begin with a simple question. Who truly controls the Middle East today? The answer is not ambiguous. The United States maintains a vast network of military bases across Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Iraq. It patrols critical maritime choke points, safeguards global oil shipping lanes, and ensures the stability of major trade routes. In effect, it acts as the central pillar of regional security and economic flow. From this vantage point, any effort to establish true regional dominance must inevitably confront this entrenched American presence. The argument presented here suggests that the most effective strategy is not direct confrontation, but gradual exhaustion. Rather than opposing American power head-on, the logic is to draw it into prolonged, costly, and strategically ambiguous conflicts, particularly those involving Iran. Over time, such engagements drain financial resources, stretch military capabilities, and erode domestic political will. Empires throughout history have often declined not through decisive defeat, but through the slow accumulation of unsustainable burdens. In this context, a prolonged confrontation with Iran becomes more than a regional conflict. It becomes a mechanism of systemic strain. Military spending escalates into the trillions, advanced weapon systems are deployed under pressure, and public support becomes increasingly fragile. The longer the conflict persists, the more it risks transforming into a strategic trap, one in which continued engagement weakens the very power it is meant to sustain. Eventually, the cost-benefit balance may shift to the point where withdrawal becomes the only viable option. If such a withdrawal were to occur, the consequences would be profound. A vacuum would emerge in a region that remains central to global energy supply and trade connectivity. The question then becomes, who is positioned to fill that vacuum? This analysis points toward Israel as a leading candidate, not merely because of its military strength, but because of its broader strategic advantages. Its geographic position at the intersection of Africa, Asia, and Europe, combined with access to both the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, places it at a critical crossroads of global movement. In a post-American Middle East, control over trade corridors, energy routes, and logistical networks could translate into significant regional influence. At the same time, the role of Iran complicates the picture. Despite being the focal point of pressure, Iran may emerge from prolonged conflict in a strengthened position. Increased oil revenues, especially in periods of global supply uncertainty, can enhance its economic resilience. Furthermore, its integration into major trade frameworks, including Trans-Eurasian corridors and infrastructure initiatives, reinforces its long-term strategic relevance. Its geography alone ensures that it remains a central node in the flow of goods between Asia and Europe. This leads to a counterintuitive but historically grounded possibility that Israel and Iran, despite their current hostility, could evolve into the two dominant poles of power in the region. History suggests that when two strong actors remain after the decline of a larger external force, they often move toward a form of pragmatic equilibrium. This does not necessarily imply cooperation in the traditional sense, but rather a recognition of mutual strength and the cost of endless conflict. In such a landscape, smaller regional actors, including the Gulf monarchies, may find their autonomy reduced, becoming increasingly dependent on or influenced by these larger powers. The broader vision that emerges from this analysis is one of transition. Just as earlier eras were defined by systems such as Pax Romana, Pax Britannica, and Pax Americana, there is the possibility of a new regional order, one that could be described as an Israeli-centered equilibrium. The foundations of such an order would extend beyond military power. Control of energy resources, influence over trade routes, dominance in data infrastructure, and superiority in intelligence capabilities would all play critical roles. In the modern world, power is no longer defined solely by territory, but by the ability to shape flows of information, capital, and connectivity. For the United States, the implications are deeply consequential. Sustained military engagement in the Middle East carries significant opportunity costs. Resources directed toward external conflicts are resources not invested in domestic priorities such as infrastructure, education, healthcare, and economic development. Over time, this imbalance can contribute to internal strain, reinforcing the very conditions that limit the country's ability to sustain global leadership. Ultimately, this argument frames geopolitical change as a gradual and often unnoticed process. Empires do not always collapse in dramatic fashion. More often, they recede incrementally, weakened by overextension and shifting global dynamics. Whether one agrees with this perspective or not, it offers a framework for thinking about how power evolves and how the interplay between military force, economic structure, and strategic geography may shape the future of the Middle East and beyond.